The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Seattle rain, the kind that didn't fall in sheets but whispered, steady and endless, over rooftops and tired souls. Emily Carter adjusted her cap. The wool soaked through, and handed the last envelope into the metal slot of the delivery van. Her fingers ached, but she smiled. At least rain hid tears better than daylight ever could. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the heater, and glanced at the passenger mirror, where a crayon drawing fluttered. Mum plus Oliver plus sunny days. Her son's handwriting. Her reason for everything. The shift was almost over when her supervisor waved from the warehouse door. Carter. One more came back undelivered. No sender address. Emily groaned softly. Let me guess. Smudged ink. Worse, he said, grinning. Handwritten. Fancy pen. No return address. Just your name on it. She frowned, taking the letter. The paper was thick, old-fashioned cream-colored, sealed with wax. Her name, Emily Carter, written in precise cursive that looked like another time, back home that night. She set the envelope beside the bills on her kitchen table. Oliver was asleep, curled around his stuffed bear. The letter seemed to hum in the quiet. Something about it felt ... intentional. She finally opened it. Inside was a folded page, faintly yellowed, inked in dark blue. If you're reading this, it means I never found the courage to say what I should have. The truth is, I left more than a company behind. I left my brother, and I don't know how to make peace with that. I hope one day he finds someone who reminds him what love sounds like. J.R. Emily froze. J.R. Her mind reached back to the hospital 5 years ago. The night a man named Jonathan Rowan died in her ward after a car crash. And the name on the wristband. Rowan, Jonathan. Her breath caught the next morning. She walked into work, clutching the letter. Her co-worker glanced at it. Nice stationery. Who's it from? I don't know, Emily said. But I think it's meant for someone else. Who? She hesitated. Maybe his brother, later that afternoon. Her route took her to downtown Rowan. Logistics Tower. The name shimmered in silver on the buildings. Glass face. Her heart pounded as she approached the reception desk. I need to speak with Mr. Rowan, she said quietly. The receptionist blinked. Mr. James Rowan. Yes, I think I have something that belongs to him. James Rowan didn't take visitors. That was what everyone said. But 20 minutes later, she was led into a high-floor office that looked out over the grey city like a fortress. He stood by the window, tall, restrained, in a dark suit that looked like it belonged to someone who'd forgotten how to breathe. When he turned, Emily almost lost her words. His eyes sharp, distant, and yet unmistakably haunted. What is it you have for me, Ms. Carter, Emily Carter? He nodded once. And this concerns? She held out the envelope. Your brother. The air shifted. James didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he took the letter, staring at the handwriting like it was a ghost. Where did you get this? He asked, voice low. It was returned to the mail center. Addressed to me, but signed by J.R. He looked at her sharply. You knew him. I was his nurse, she said softly. The night of the crash, silence filled the room, not empty, but thick with something unspoken. James finally said he shouldn't have written this. Why? Because he had nothing to apologize for. Emily looked at him. People don't write apologies unless they need to. Their eyes met to strangers bound by someone gone, standing in a room where the past still breathed. When she left, the rain had started again. James stood by the window, letter trembling in his hand. He read it once, twice, a third time. I hope one day he finds someone who reminds him what love sounds like. He glanced out at the city, then down to the small figure crossing the street below. The woman with a mailbag over her shoulder and a heart that didn't seem to know how to stop caring. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. James didn't sleep that night. The letter sat on his desk, unfolded, lit by the glow of the city beyond the window. He'd read it enough times to memorize every curve of his brother's handwriting, the way the ink pressed too hard in some places. Like Jonathan had been racing against time itself. I left more than a company behind. I left my brother, he whispered it under his breath, left, as if Jonathan had chosen to go. But he hadn't. The crash had taken that choice. The next morning, the world went on as if nothing had changed. Board meetings, reports, investor calls. But every time James signed his name, he saw the initials JR in the corner of his vision. By noon, he gave up pretending to care about numbers and called his assistant. Get me everything on an Emily Carter, employee at the Westlake Distribution Center. The assistant hesitated. Any particular reason? James paused, looking again at the letter. Yes, he said quietly. She delivered something I didn't know I was waiting for. Meanwhile, in a quieter part of town, Emily poured cereal for Oliver. Mum, he said between bites, why were you sad last night? She froze for half a second, then smiled. You saw that? He nodded. I hear things. You were looking at that letter. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. It's just from someone who missed their chance to say goodbye. He thought about it, serious in the way only children can be. Then maybe you can say it for them. Emily blinked. Out of the mouths of 6-year-olds that afternoon, a black car pulled up outside the small postal branch. James stepped out, dressed down, no tie, no entourage. Just a man trying to look ordinary and failing. Emily was sorting parcels when she saw him through the glass door. Her stomach tightened. He walked in quietly. Ms. Carter, Mr. Rowan, she said, surprised. You came here. I needed to return something. He handed her the letter, now refolded neatly. I thought maybe you'd want to keep it. She frowned. But it was meant for you. He hesitated. Maybe it was meant for both of us. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was heavy. But alive, James looked around at the small post office. Chipped paint, humming fluorescent lights, warmth that corporate lobbies never had. You've worked here long. 2 years, she said. Before that, I was a nurse. He nodded, remembering. You said you were with my brother. That night, yes. What was he like? I don't remember him that way. The man in that letter, Emily's hands stilled on a stack of envelopes. He was kind, restless, like someone running out of time but pretending he wasn't. James looked down. That sounds like both of us. After a long pause, she said quietly, he spoke about you. James looked up sharply. What did he say? She hesitated. Not much. Just that he hoped you'd stop trying to carry everything alone. He almost laughed, bitter, small. That's rich, coming from him. He said it because he couldn't. James froze. Something cracked in his expression, barely, but enough. As he turned to leave, she stopped him. There's something else. He turned, She reached into her drawer and pulled out a small envelope, sealed and unmarked. "I've had this since that night," she said softly. "He asked me to keep it safe. I never opened it." James stared at it like it might burn him. "You don't know what's inside?" "No, but I think it was meant for you." He took it slowly, like accepting a live wire. When their fingers brushed, Emily felt a jolt that wasn't romantic. Not yet, something heavier, older. Recognition. He nodded once. "Thank you." And then, with the letter pressed against his chest, he walked out into the rain again, that evening. In his apartment overlooking the Sound, James sat with the envelope unopened. It had no markings, no hint, no clue, just a silence that weighed more than any confession. He could have torn it open. He didn't single quotes. Instead, he picked up his phone, found Emily's contact from the company directory, and typed a message, then erased it, typed again, "I read your file. You left nursing after the accident. Why?" Deleted. Typed again. "Can we talk about Jonathan tomorrow?" He stared at the blinking cursor, then pressed send. Across town. Emily was tucking Oliver into bed when her phone buzzed. She read the message. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. Her life was already complicated enough. But then she remembered the sound of Jonathan's voice, weak and trembling, whispering that last request as she held his hand. "If you ever meet my brother, tell him he still has time." She exhaled slowly and typed back, "Tomorrow, 4 p.m, the park near the pier." And for the first time since that night 5 years ago, she felt something like hope, fragile but alive. The park was almost empty when Emily arrived. A few joggers passed by, and the ocean wind carried the smell of wet grass and salt. She found a bench near the pier, the kind of place that made silence feel less lonely. James was already there. No suit this time, just a coat, dark jeans, and that same quiet weight in his posture, like every breath he took cost something. He stood when she approached. "Ms. Carter?" "Emily," she corrected gently. He hesitated. "Emily, then?" For a moment, neither spoke. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the small, sealed envelope. "This," he said quietly, "is the reason I couldn't sleep last night." Emily nodded. "You haven't opened it yet?" "No. Why?" He looked at the letter, his thumb tracing its edge. "Because once I know what's inside, there's no going back to not knowing." She understood that more than he realized. He sat down on the bench, the letter between them like something alive. "You said you were there when he died," he said. "I was." "Did he say anything else?" Emily exhaled. The memory was still sharp. The smell of antiseptic, the rain against the hospital windows, the machines slowing one by one. "He talked about the bridge project," she said quietly. "And you?" James turned. "The bridge." He said it was supposed to be more than just infrastructure, that it was his apology to you. James frowned. "Apology for what?" She shook her head. He didn't say. A gull screamed overhead. Somewhere far away, a fairy horn blew through the mist. Emily looked down. "He also said something strange. He told me, if you ever meet my brother, tell him he still has time." James froze. "That's what made me come to your office," she continued. "I didn't even know you existed until the letter showed up." He stared at the envelope like it might answer her for him. Then, quietly, "Time for what?" "I don't know," she said. "But maybe that's what's in there." He held the envelope between his hands. His fingers trembled slightly. I spent years hating him, James said softly, for leaving me with everything, the company, the lawsuits, the guilt. I told myself he was reckless, selfish, weak. But now I read his words, and I realize maybe he was just human. Emily nodded. We all are, Mr. Rowan. He almost smiled. James. She looked at him. James. It sounded gentler than he expected. The wind picked up, whipping a strand of hair across her face. She brushed it away, and he hesitated, as if fighting the impulse to reach out. Then he tore the envelope open. The paper inside was folded once, worn with time, the ink slightly blurred. He unfolded it slowly. Emily leaned in, and together they read. James, if this ever reaches you, I want you to know I didn't build that bridge for the company. I built it for us, for all the things we never said. I left behind something, a folder in the office basement under my name. Project Hope. Inside is everything I couldn't explain. You'll understand when you see it. And if you don't find Emily Carter, she'll know why I trusted her. Love you, brother. I just never said it right. Jonathan, the world went still. Emily's pulse quickened. He mentioned me, she whispered. James stared at the page. He left something. For both of us. She frowned. Project Hope. What is that? He shook his head slowly. I don't know. There's no file by that name in any of our records. But he said, basement office. That means old archives, pre-merger. He folded the letter carefully, slipping it into his coat pocket like it was made of glass. I'll find it. Emily hesitated. James. He looked up. There's something you should know, she said softly. The night he died, he gave me something else, too. He stiffened. What? She reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive, sealed in a plastic cover. I never looked at it. I didn't want to. But now, he stared at it, a simple silver USB. But the sight of it hit him like a blow. My brother didn't even own a computer outside the office, he said. If he carried this. Emily nodded. Then maybe he meant for you to see it. The air between them thickened. Do you want to look at it together? She asked. He met her eyes, dark, tired, but clearer than before. Yes. They sat in silence for a long moment. The flash drive between them like a line drawn by fate itself. Then James said softly, Thank you for not opening it. Emily smiled faintly. Some things are heavier when you face them alone. As the wind picked up and the waves crashed against the pier, he looked at her, this woman who had carried a piece of his brother's story for 5 years, without asking for anything in return. He said quietly, I think maybe you were the one he was talking about. What do you mean? The one who'd remind me what love sounds like. Emily looked away, heart pounding. Then you're not listening closely enough yet. The Rowan Logistics archival building sat on the edge of the old industrial district, a squat, windowless structure with ivy crawling up its brick walls. James hadn't been here in years. He stood beside Emily under the grey afternoon sky, hands in his pockets, staring at the rusted door like it might bite. This was our first office, he said quietly, before everything got shiny. Emily looked up at the building. Does anyone even come here anymore? Only ghosts, he murmured. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of forgotten paper. Rows of old filing cabinets stretched into the dark. The hum of distant machinery echoed like a heartbeat. James flipped the breaker. Dim yellow lights flickered on overhead. Emily followed him through the aisles, her footsteps soft. The deeper they went, the older the documents became. Invoices typed on yellowing pages, folders stamped with ink long faded. Finally, they reached the end of the corridor, where a door marked Private Archive, 2009, sat slightly ajar. James pushed it open. Inside was a cramped office, a desk, a broken lamp, a wall of boxes labeled Infrastructure, Bridge Division. This was Jonathan's space, James said. He was obsessed with his own system. He hated the corporate filing. Emily ran her fingers across the desk, brushing off dust. There were still pen marks carved into the wood, loops and sketches of bridges. Faint mathematical equations scrawled along the side. Her chest tightened. He was brilliant, wasn't he? James gave a sad smile. Brilliant and impossible. He built dreams and forgot to build walls around them. They started searching. For nearly an hour, James opened boxes and sifted through folders, growing more frustrated. Contracts, budget reports, nothing called Project Hope. Emily crouched near the bottom cabinet and found a locked drawer. "James," she called softly. "What's this?" He knelt beside her. The drawer was sealed with a small digital padlock, one of the older models. He punched a few numbers. Nothing. He frowned. Jonathan used dates for everything. Try 1203, his birthday. It beeped red dot. Emily thought for a second. What about 06 to 1? The day of the bridge's groundbreaking? A soft click. The drawer opened. Inside was a single folder, wrapped in plastic, labeled in Jonathan's handwriting, Project Hope, Confidential. James froze. He really did it. Emily looked up at him. What is it? He opened the folder. Inside were blueprints, not for bridges or highways, but for modular delivery hubs, portable systems for shipping emergency supplies into disaster zones. She scanned the notes. This isn't logistics. This is humanitarian work. James nodded slowly, reading his brother's scrawled lines. Prototype design, small-scale network for disaster response. Goal, prove that logistics can serve people before profit. He sank into the chair, rubbing his forehead. I remember now, he said quietly. He pitched this to the board 3 months before the crash. They rejected it, said it wasn't profitable. Emily looked at him. And you? He hesitated. I was the one who signed the rejection. Her eyes widened. You cancelled your brother's project. He nodded, shame thick in his throat. I didn't even read the full proposal. I was too busy keeping investors happy. He stopped speaking to me after that. The truth sat between them like a wound reopening dot. Emily touched the folder gently. Then maybe this is your chance to finish it. James gave a hollow laugh. You think a letter and a forgotten file can erase what I did? No, she said softly. But it can mean it wasn't for nothing. He reached for the flash drive Emily had brought and plugged it into the old computer on the desk. It hummed weakly to life, the screen flickering. A single video file appeared, for James. James hesitated, then clicked play. The image came to life. Jonathan sat at the same desk they were sitting at now, face pale but smiling faintly at the camera. Hey brother, he said. If you're watching this, it means you finally stopped running long enough to look back. James froze. Emily covered her mouth. Jonathan continued, his voice calm but heavy. I know you think I hate you. I don't. You did what you thought was right, keeping the company alive. I just wish you'd seen that sometimes doing good is good business." He laughed softly. "Project Hope isn't just mine, James. It's yours too. Because the system I designed, the one they rejected, it was built on your old plans. You inspired it. I just added the part you forgot. The heart." Jonathan's smile faded. "If I don't make it back, promise me one thing. Don't build walls higher than the bridges we never finished." The video glitched, froze, then ended. For a long time, the room was silent. Emily blinked away tears. James just sat there, staring at the blank screen, his hand trembling on the desk. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "He forgave me." She nodded. "He loved you." James shook his head. "And I killed his dream." "No," she said gently. "You just haven't built it yet." He looked at her, eyes glassy. "Why are you helping me?" "Because someone once told me we all still have time." He exhaled, broken but lighter. For the first time, the silence between them didn't hurt. As they walked out into the rain, James glanced back at the flickering light in the office, the ghost of his brother's face still frozen on the monitor. He whispered, "I'll finish it. I promise." Emily turned toward him, the wind lifting her hair, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "Then maybe," she said softly, "that's what hope was always meant to be." The next morning, James stood in front of the glass tower of Rowan Logistics again. But this time, it felt different. He wasn't here as a CEO hiding behind numbers. He was here as a man who owed his brother a promise. In his hand was the Project Hope folder, sealed again, no longer a memory, but a blueprint for redemption. As he stepped into the elevator, his reflection stared back, same suit, same eyes, but something quieter had settled inside him. The doors closed. The boardroom was already full when he entered. 10 men and women in sleek suits turned to look at him, some surprised, some wary. "James," one of the older members said, "you called this meeting on short notice. What's this about?" He placed the folder on the table. "It's about finishing what my brother started." A murmur rippled around the room. "I found Jonathan's proposal. Project Hope, a humanitarian delivery system using our logistics network. I want it reinstated." The CFO scoffed. "That project was scrapped for a reason. It's a money pit." James met his gaze steadily. "It's not about profit. Then what's it about?" He hesitated, then said simply, "Purpose." The room fell silent. The chairman, a grey-haired man named Porter, leaned back. "You've been through a lot, James. We sympathize. But idealism doesn't move freight." "Maybe not," James said, "but it moves people. And without people, we're nothing but trucks and invoices." Someone muttered, "We're a corporation, not a charity." James's voice hardened. "Then maybe it's time we stopped acting like they're opposites." The vote was quick and merciless. Project Hope rejected as the board filed out. Porter paused at the door. "You're not your brother, James. Stop trying to be." James smiled faintly. "No, I'm trying to be the man he believed I could be." That evening, he drove to the pier. Emily was there, sitting on a bench watching Oliver feed the gulls. When she saw him, she smiled softly. "You look like someone who lost a war." He sat beside her. "Maybe I did. Board didn't approve it." He shook his head. "They voted it down before I even finished my sentence." She frowned. "So what now?" He looked out at the horizon, the water glimmering under pale light. "Now," he said quietly, "I build it myself." She turned to him. "You can't just, I can," he interrupted gently. "Jonathan didn't need the company's permission, and neither do I." Emily studied him. There was a spark in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Something alive. "You really believe this can work?" she asked. He nodded. "It's not about belief. It's about owing someone a promise." Over the next few days, Emily found herself pulled into his orbit again. She helped him dig through old contact lists, find Jonathan's former engineers, and track down suppliers. They met in coffee shops and co-working spaces, surrounded by sketches and notes. It wasn't glamorous, just to people with too much coffee, not enough sleep, and a shared ghost driving them forward. At one point, Oliver wandered in after school, watching them work. "Mom," he said, "are you fixing something?" Emily smiled. "Sort of." James looked up and added, "We're rebuilding something someone loved." One night, Emily found James asleep at his desk, papers scattered everywhere. She hesitated, then draped her cardigan over his shoulders. For a long moment, she just stood there, watching him breathe. There was something in the way his brow furrowed, even in rest. A man still fighting himself. Even in dreams. She whispered, "You don't have to win alone." The next morning, James woke to the sound of soft humming. Emily was by the window, making coffee from the small machine she'd brought. The smell filled the air, warm, grounding, human. He smiled faintly. "You always show up before I break." She turned. "And you always act like you haven't already." They shared a small laugh, the kind that felt like sunlight after rain by the end of the week. The first prototype design was finished, a compact supply module that could fit into any cargo truck and convert into a relief station. James stared at it, pride and pain mingling in his chest. He turned to Emily. "He would have loved this." She nodded. "Then build it. For him." "For you?" He looked at her, really looked, and said, "For us." Her heart stuttered, but she didn't look away. As the evening fell, James stood by the window, watching the city glow. "Emily," he said quietly, "I made a promise once, to never let emotion lead me. It nearly killed me." She stepped closer, and now, he smiled faintly, "now I think feeling is the only thing keeping me alive." 2 weeks later, the first prototype of Project Hope was ready. It sat gleaming under the soft fluorescent lights of a rented workshop, a modular steel container, no bigger than a truck, yet somehow full of possibility. James ran his hand along its surface. "We did it," he said quietly. Emily smiled. "No, you did it." He shook his head. "No one does anything worth doing alone." They worked late into the night, fine-tuning sensors, checking power outputs, labeling supply compartments. Oliver sat in the corner, coloring in a sketch of the container. When he showed it to them, he'd drawn a small red heart on the side. "Every truck should have one," he said seriously, "so people know it's not scary." Emily laughed softly. "I think you just named the logo." James smiled, for once without hesitation. "Then let's make it official." By the end of the week, news of Rowan's secret project had begun to leak. A blog article appeared first. "Disgraced CEO revives dead brother's humanitarian dream, PR stunt or redemption play." Then came the reporters, the drones hovering outside the workshop, the headlines, Project Hope or False Hope. Single mom helps billionaire rebuild image after family scandal. Emily froze when she saw the last one. The photo showed her walking out of the workshop, Oliver holding her hand. Her stomach turned. That evening, James found her sitting in her car outside her apartment, the newspaper on her lap. "I'm sorry," he said. She didn't look up. "They called my son a prop." "I know," her voice trembled. "He's 6 years old. James, I'll fix it." "How?" "You can't fix people's mouths." He hesitated, and for once, didn't have an answer. The next morning, investors started pulling out. The board released a public statement distancing the company from Project Hope, calling it a personal side initiative with no financial backing from Rowan Logistics. By noon, James's inbox was full of cancellations. Emily arrived at the office to find him sitting in silence, his hands clasped together. "They're cutting me off," he said simply. "No funding, no support, not even permission to use the company logo." "So what now?" she asked. He looked at her. "Now I sell everything I own." He did, by the end of the week. James had liquidated his private portfolio, 3 properties, 1 car, and a lifetime's worth of safety. Every cent went into Project Hope when Emily found out. She was furious. "You can't keep bleeding for this," she said, slamming a folder onto the table. "It's not bleeding if it's for something that matters," he said quietly. "You think Jonathan would want this?" "Yes," James said. "And I think he'd want me to finally finish something I believe in." Her anger melted into something softer, fear disguised as frustration. "You're going to burn out." He smiled faintly. "Then at least it'll be for the right reason this time." Days blurred into nights. Emily worked with him, sometimes too late, sometimes without dinner. Oliver started leaving drawings on James's desk, hearts, trucks, bridges, all with the same word written in block letters: hope. And somehow, that word kept them going. But the world wasn't done testing them. A month later, a TV anchor's voice filled every channel. Former CEO James Rowan faces internal review after unauthorized funding of unapproved operations. Emily's phone buzzed. Her heart dropped as she read the message. "Urgent, you were mentioned in the report. Please respond to inquiries about your involvement in Project Hope." She scrolled further screenshots of hospital records leaked online. Her name, the date, the same night Jonathan Rowan died. Her past, the one she'd tried so hard to bury, laid out for the world to pick apart. When James arrived, she was sitting in her kitchen, pale and shaking. "They found it," she whispered. "The old records. The accident. I'm on the news." He stared, jaw tightening. "They're blaming you. They're saying I helped hide something, that I tampered with the report." His voice went cold. "That's not true. I know that. You know that. But the world," he stepped closer, his voice firm. "Let me handle it." She met his eyes. "Don't you see? This is exactly what they want to drag both of us down. If you stand up for me, you'll lose everything." He hesitated. "Then I guess that's the cost of hope." The next day, James walked into a press conference unannounced. The cameras swiveled. Flashes erupted like lightning. He took the podium. "My name is James Rowan," he said steadily. "And yes, I used my own funds to build Project Hope. No, it wasn't for profit. And no, Ms. Emily Carter had no part in any wrongdoing." He looked directly into the cameras. She saved my brother's life the only way she could, by staying with him when no one else did. If that's a crime, then maybe the world needs better laws. Gasps rippled through the room. The anchor whispered into her mic. The reporters scribbled like wildfire, and somewhere, watching from her apartment, Emily covered her mouth, tears running down her cheeks. By evening, the fallout was brutal. The board convened an emergency session. Within hours, James Rowan was removed from his position as CEO. When Emily arrived at his office, he was already packing the last box. She stood in the doorway. "You didn't have to do that." He smiled faintly. "You were right. I couldn't fix people's mouths." Her throat tightened. "What will you do now?" He looked down at the Project Hope folder, tucking it under his arm. "Finish what I started," he said quietly, "with or without a title." That night, as he left the building for the last time, rain began to fall again, steady, cold. Relentless. Emily stood waiting outside with an umbrella. He stopped. Surprised, she stepped closer, holding it over him. "You didn't think I'd let you walk out alone, did you?" He looked at her, a soft, tired smile breaking through. "You always show up when I fall." She shrugged. "Maybe I just like the rain." They stood there in silence, sharing one small umbrella under the storm. Two people soaked, exhausted but unbroken. The days after his resignation were quieter than James expected. No reporters waiting outside his apartment. No phone calls from investors. No meetings, no chaos. Just silence. The kind that didn't feel peaceful, only empty. The news had already moved on. The world had forgotten him faster than it had condemned him. But some things didn't fade. Like the folder marked Project Hope that still sat on his kitchen counter. And the memory of Emily's face when he'd said goodbye at the gate, proud, broken, and trying not to show it. Emily, too, found herself stranded between relief and despair. She'd been put on leave, pending review, by the postal department, a polite way of saying they didn't want the controversy. Bills piled up. Oliver's school called twice about tuition delays. She tried to smile for him, but her eyes told on her. One night she found him sitting by the window, drawing in silence. "What are you working on, sweetheart?" she asked gently. He held up the paper. It was the Project Hope truck, but this time it was broken in half, a storm drawn between the pieces. Her throat tightened. "That's a bit sad, don't you think?" Oliver shrugged. "It's just until they fix it." Meanwhile, James spent his nights at a rented warehouse on the docks. Staring at the unfinished prototype, he couldn't stop hearing his brother's voice from the video. "Don't build walls higher than the bridges we never finished." But lately, all he'd built were walls around his heart, his failure, his guilt, until one night, a knock echoed through the rain. He opened the door. Emily stood there, soaked, shivering, but steady. "I told myself I wouldn't come," she said, "but I can't watch you disappear like this." He blinked, stunned. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should you," she shot back. He almost smiled. "Come in before you drown." She stepped inside, shaking off her coat. The warehouse was cold, lit only by a single desk lamp. Her eyes fell on the half-finished container. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's useless," he said. "Without funding, it'll never move an inch." She turned to him. "Then we'll move it ourselves." He blinked. "We," she nodded. "I'm not letting your brother's dream die just because the world doesn't understand it." They worked side by side again, scraping, sanding, wiring, piecing together fragments of something that used to be bigger than both of them. Some nights, they didn't speak at all. Some nights, they laughed. And some nights, when the silence grew too heavy, she'd play old songs on her phone just to fill the air. Little by little, they built more than a machine. They built rhythm. They built trust. But time, as always, demanded payment. One morning, Emily got a call from the school nurse. Oliver fainted during class. The voice said, "He's at the hospital." Her world blurred. She barely remembered how she got there. James followed close behind, silent, terrified, in the ER. The doctor explained dehydration, exhaustion, but something deeper. A heart murmur they hadn't caught before. Tests needed. Money needed. Time needed. Emily gripped the railing beside the hospital bed. Shaking, "I can't lose him," she whispered. James placed a hand on her shoulder, tentative. "But real, you won't," he said quietly. "I promise." That night, he went back to the warehouse alone. The rain came harder than before. He stared at the Project Hope unit, the dream that had cost him everything, and for the first time, he hated it. He punched the metal side until his knuckles split. "What good are you," he shouted, "if you can't even save one person?" His voice broke on the last word. Then he sank to his knees, the rain mixing with blood, his breath ragged. But when he looked up again, something changed. A thought, wild, impossible, but alive. The next morning, he called a government contact, an old friend from before the fall. He made one offer: full transfer of Project Hope's blueprints, rights, and patents in exchange for emergency funding under humanitarian aid. When the agent asked, "Do you understand what this means?" James said simply, "Yes. It means I stop owning it, and it starts saving people." By evening, the contract was signed. Every blueprint, every design, every innovation, gone. But when he walked into the hospital later that night, he wasn't empty. He was free. Emily was sitting by Oliver's bed, eyes red from crying. When she saw him, she stood quickly. "James," he smiled. "He's going to get everything he needs." The hospital's covered. Her brow furrowed. "How?" "I made a deal," he said softly. "Project Hope's theirs now." Her voice trembled. "You sold it." He shook his head. "No, I gave it away." Tears filled her eyes. "Why would you do that?" He looked at Oliver, asleep, breathing softly. "Because I finally understood what my brother meant," he said. "Hope isn't something you own. It's something you give." Emily pressed her hand to her mouth, sobbing. He stepped closer, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I promised I'd finish what he started," he said gently. "And now, maybe I finally did." She looked up at him, eyes shining with both grief and gratitude. "You did more than that, James," she whispered. "You saved us." Outside, the rain finally stopped. The clouds broke open just enough for light to slip through, and for the first time in months, the sky above Seattle wasn't grey. It had been 8 days since Oliver's surgery, 8 days of watching monitors blink, nurses whisper, and coffee turn cold on the bedside table. Emily hadn't left the hospital once. The world outside had shrunk to this room. The sound of ventilators, the rustle of sheets, and her son's soft breathing. He was going to be okay. That was all that mattered, but still, she kept turning toward the door, waiting for a man who never came back. The last time she saw James, He'd been standing by that very window, rain still clinging to his hair, eyes full of something between peace and goodbye. He'd said it so calmly. Hope isn't something you own. It's something you give. And then he was gone. No calls. No messages. Not even a signature on the discharge papers. It was as if he'd walked straight into the storm and vanished. When Oliver finally woke, the first thing he asked was, "Is Mr. James okay?" Emily froze. "He's resting," she said softly. Oliver frowned. "Then we should visit him." She smiled a trembling, fragile smile. "Maybe someday." He nodded sleepily and drifted back to dreams. The next few days blurred into slow recovery, stitches healing, machines being unplugged, doctors signing forms. And then one morning, as Emily sat by the window, flipping through the newspaper left by a nurse, her eyes stopped, front page. Project Hope approved nationwide government. Partnership launches humanitarian relief network based on designs by former CEO James Rowan. Below it, a photo, trucks lined up at dawn, each painted with a small red heart. Oliver's design. She pressed her fingers to her lips, a sob breaking free. He'd done it. Even after everything, he'd done it. The article went on. Rowan declined to attend the official launch ceremony, citing personal reasons. Sources say he donated all remaining proceeds to pediatric medical research in honor of his late brother. Emily's vision blurred. He hadn't just disappeared. He'd kept working quietly, unseen, turning every piece of himself into something that would outlive him. She whispered, "You kept your promise, James," that night. When Oliver was finally asleep, she gathered her things from the hospital room. Inside her bag was the old Project Hope folder she'd taken from his desk, the one he'd left behind. She hadn't opened it in weeks, but now something slipped out from between the papers. A folded letter, sealed with plain wax, no stamp, no envelope, just her name. Emily. Her breath caught. She opened it with trembling hands. "Emily, if you're reading this, it means the work is done. I promised you I'd keep your son safe, not because I owed it to anyone, but because I wanted to. I used to think redemption was something you earn. Turns out it's something you choose. You once said I looked like someone who lost a war. Maybe that's true, but I finally realized losing isn't the worst thing that can happen. The worst thing is never fighting for something worth losing for. Thank you for giving me something worth fighting for. Tell Oliver that every truck he sees with a red heart, that's his. It means hope found a way home." She sat there for a long time, the paper trembling in her hands, tears blurring the ink. Outside, the world was waking up, nurses changing shifts, coffee carts rattling, the smell of fresh rain seeping through the open window. She stepped out into the hallway, letter clutched to her chest, feeling the morning light touch her face. For the first time in months, the weight in her chest began to lift. He was gone, yes, but not lost, because everywhere she looked now, there were signs of him. The heart painted on hospital supply crates, the relief trucks driving through the city at dawn, the quiet hum of something good that kept going even when no one was watching. Weeks later, she and Oliver stood on a hill overlooking the freeway. Dozens of trucks rolled out beneath, the rising sun all carrying the same emblem, a small red heart. Oliver's eyes widened. "They're all ours." Emily smiled, tears glinting in the light. "They're everyone's now." He tugged her hand. "Do you think Mr. James can see them?" She looked at the horizon, where sunlight broke through a thin line of clouds. "I think," she whispered, "he's the reason they're moving." As the convoy disappeared down the road, the wind lifted a corner of the letter still in her hand. She glanced down, one last line she hadn't noticed before, scrawled faintly at the bottom. "P.S. There's a coffee shop by the pier that still keeps your cardigan. Maybe I'll return it someday." She laughed through tears, whispering, "Then I guess I'll keep waiting." 1 year later, Seattle looked different. Or maybe it was Emily who had changed. The city no longer felt like a wound. It felt like something that had healed, not perfectly, not without scars, but enough to move again. Project Hope had become a national symbol. The red heart logo was on billboards, hospital walls, delivery trucks, even school murals. Sometimes, when she and Oliver walked downtown, people would stop them and smile. They didn't know her story, not really, but they recognized the emblem, the quiet pride in her eyes. And that was enough. Emily now worked part-time for the Project Hope Foundation, not as a nurse, not as a public face, but as a community coordinator. She organized donations, trained volunteers, and helped families find what she once needed most. Safety. It wasn't glamorous. But every night, when she put Oliver to bed, she could look at herself in the mirror and whisper, "We made it." On the anniversary of the program's launch, she received a cream-colored envelope in the mail. No return address, just a date, time, and location. Saturday, 6 p.m., Rowan Memorial Garden. Her fingers hesitated. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, the kind that came from someone who'd written more than a few unsent letters. That Saturday, she dressed in quiet tones, grey coat, soft scarf, her hair tied loosely. Oliver held her hand as they walked through the rows of flowers at the memorial site. The event was small, a few dozen people, reporters, board members, volunteers. A gentle wind carried the scent of rain and roses. At the center stood a bronze statue, Jonathan Rowan, smiling. One hand on a globe, the other holding a small toy truck engraved with a heart underneath. A plaque read, "He believed the world could be better, and so did the ones who carried his dream." Emily placed a small white lily at the base. "Thank you," she whispered. Oliver, standing beside her, added quietly, "For the trucks." A soft chuckle behind them made her freeze. "I think he'd like that answer." A familiar voice said. Her heart stopped. She turned, and there he was, James. Rowan, different, but unmistakably him. His hair was longer, streaked with silver at the edges. A light beard framed his jaw. His once pristine suits replaced by a simple, dark coat and rolled-up sleeves. But his eyes, they were the same. Gentle, a little tired, alive, high. He said softly. Emily couldn't move. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, smiling. She finally breathed. "I thought I had." He nodded slowly. "Guess I owe you a better ending than a letter." For a long moment, they just stood there, the crowd fading, the ceremony a blur around them. Oliver spotted him and gasped, "Mr. James." James crouched down instinctively, smiling. "Hey, champ. You got taller," Oliver beamed. "And you got hairier." Emily laughed, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't made in months. James grinned. Fair trade. When Oliver ran off to chase pigeons near the fountain, the air between the two adults softened into something unspoken. "I didn't know if you'd come," Emily said. "I wasn't sure if I should," he replied. The program doesn't need me anymore. You've made it. Better than I ever could. She shook her head. You started it. We just kept it alive. He looked down. I missed a lot. You were busy saving the world, she teased gently. He smiled faintly. Maybe, but I forgot that part of my world was right here. Silent, stretched, comfortable, heavy, full. Then he said quietly, I didn't disappear to run away. After the deal, I spent months traveling with the first units. I needed to see it working, to see if it was worth everything, and was it? She asked softly. He met her gaze. It was worth you, her breath caught. For a moment, neither of them moved. Just two people standing in the golden light of evening, surrounded by flowers, memories, and the weight of everything they'd survived. A volunteer's voice called for closing remarks. James stepped forward to the microphone unexpectedly. Jonathan once said, he began, voice steady, that hope isn't built in boardrooms, it's carried in hands. Hands like yours. He looked at Emily. Hands like hers. His voice wavered, but he kept going. We built this from loss, from mistakes, from grief, but maybe that's what makes it strong. Because anything born from pain knows how to hold on. The crowd was silent, then applause, soft but growing. After the ceremony, as dusk fell, Emily found him near the pier. The air smelled of salt and smoke. The same old coffee shop still stood at the corner, its sign flickering faintly. She smiled. You know, they still have your cardigan, he chuckled. I know. They wouldn't sell it back to me. Maybe they were waiting for the right person to come get it. He turned to her, eyes soft. Maybe they were. He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small red pin, shaped like the heart on the trucks. I kept one, he said. For when I found my way home, he handed it to her. His fingers brushed hers, a small touch, but it felt like the closing of a circle. She pinned it to her coat, over her heart. Welcome home, James, she whispered. The world didn't stop for them. It just slowed down enough to let them catch their breath, for the first time in years. James had no board meetings, no investors, no headlines, just mornings that began with sunlight instead of alarms, and nights that ended with quiet instead of guilt. He'd rented a small place near the waterfront. Nothing grand, just a two-room apartment above an old bookstore. The kind that smelled like dust and salt and paper. Emily and Oliver came by often. At first with excuses. You forgot your scarf. Oliver wanted to say hi, but soon they stopped pretending they needed reasons. Some evenings, James would cook badly, but with effort. Emily would sit on the counter, laughing at his hopeless attempts to measure salt without looking. Oliver would draw on the back of delivery boxes, sketching new versions of the Project Hope trucks, now with sunflowers painted along the sides, because they follow the sun, he said proudly. Even when it rains. James smiled. That's good branding. Emily looked at him across the small kitchen and whispered, it's good healing. They didn't talk about the past much, not the scandals, not the hospital nights, not the way he'd disappeared. It wasn't denial, just a quiet agreement that what mattered was now, and sometimes now was enough. One afternoon, they went back to the pier, the same spot where they'd last seen each other before the storm. The same coffee shop, still humming with the smell of roasted beans and sea breeze. Emily ordered 2 cups, black for him, caramel latte for her. When the barista handed them over, she smiled and said, Funny thing, someone used to order this same combo every Sunday a year ago. Emily smiled faintly. I know. They sat on the bench overlooking the water. Oliver was throwing breadcrumbs at the seagulls, laughing as they swooped and fought mid-air. For a while, neither adult spoke. The ocean moved slow, gentle, alive. Finally, James said quietly, "You ever think about what would have happened if none of this had fallen apart?" Emily turned to him. "You mean if you hadn't lost your company, and I hadn't lost my job?" He nodded. She thought for a moment. Then maybe we never would have found each other. He looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, she didn't look away. That night, back at her apartment, Emily found another letter. It wasn't in the mail, just slipped under her door, sealed with the same faint wax mark. Her heart fluttered. She sat down and unfolded it. Emily, I used to think the story ended when the work was done, when the program launched, when the debt was paid, when the promise was kept. But maybe that's not the ending. Maybe it's just the pause before something real begins. I don't know what the future looks like, and I don't want to predict it. But if you'll have me, I'd like to learn what ordinary feels like. Coffee that goes cold, dishes that never get done, laughs that come out of nowhere. I want to build something again, not out of steel or paper, but out of mornings. Out of us. J.R. Emily smiled through tears, pressing the paper to her chest. She didn't call. She didn't text. Instead, she put on her coat and walked out into the night. The air was cold but soft. The sky streaked with faint light, the kind of light that doesn't come from the sun, but from ending storms. And there he was, James, leaning against the railing near the pier, a single red heart pin on his lapel glinting under the lamplight. When he saw her, he straightened, unsure, nervous, hopeful. She didn't speak. She just walked up to him, reached for his hand, and said quietly, "Then let's build it." He smiled, small at first, then wider, brighter, fuller, and just like that, the night around them stopped feeling like the end of something. It felt like the beginning of something true. The waves rolled gently against the dock, carrying the sound of laughter and a promise remade, not of redemption this time, but of belonging. The morning sun spilled softly through the curtains. Birds called outside, gentle and rhythmic, like a heartbeat that had learned to slow down. Emily woke first, as she always did. The sound of waves rolled faintly in the distance. The ocean had become their new neighbor, whispering through every dawn. The house was small, white walls, creaky floors, sea breeze always sneaking through the windows, but it was theirs, a place built not of money, or status, or even luck, but of after storms, after loss, after learning that peace isn't found, it's made. In the kitchen, James stood barefoot, holding 2 mugs of coffee and trying not to burn toast again, when Emily entered. Half asleep and smiling, he said, "I swear the toaster's haunted." She laughed softly. "No, you just refuse to measure anything." "True," he admitted, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "I like living dangerously." "Dangerous is letting you cook breakfast," she teased. Oliver appeared in the doorway, hair messy, rubbing his eyes. "Are we burning something again?" "Not yet," Emily said. "But we're close." They all laughed after breakfast. They sat on the porch, mugs warm in their hands, the morning fog lifting off the water. Oliver was building something out of driftwood and seashells near the sand. Emily rested her head on James's shoulder. It had been a year since the return, a year since she'd found him again at the memorial. A year since they'd decided not to chase perfection, but to live in the ordinary. And it turned out ordinary was enough. The world hadn't forgotten Project Hope. In fact, it had grown beyond them. There were now hundreds of mobile aid stations, each marked with the same small red heart. The program had expanded to dozens of countries, disaster zones, refugee camps, remote villages, and a month ago, the Foundation Board had voted to rename the initiative the Rowan Carter Foundation. When James received the letter, he'd stared at it for a long time before saying, quietly, they finally got it right. It was never just one name. That morning, the mail truck stopped at their gate, a sound that still made Emily's heart ache and smile all at once. Oliver raced to grab the envelope, running back with triumph. Dad, Mum, it's got the red seal. Emily froze for half a second. Dad. She looked at James, who seemed just as stunned. Then both of them laughed softly, a little embarrassed, a little overwhelmed. James opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single letter. Dear Mr. Rowan, we are pleased to inform you that the Foundation's latest branch has been completed. A children's wing dedicated to pediatric recovery and rehabilitation. We have named it Oliver's Haven. Thank you for giving the world a way to keep hope alive. The Rowan Carter Foundation Board. Emily covered her mouth, tears welling. James just sat there, staring at the words, unable to speak. Oliver's Haven, she whispered. They remembered. He nodded slowly. They remembered everything. Outside, Oliver was still playing, piling stones into little towers, humming off-key. James smiled faintly. He has your persistence. Emily nudged him. And your stubbornness. He laughed quietly. That's a dangerous mix. Later that day, James went upstairs to his small desk by the window. It overlooked the ocean, endless blue, the kind that reminded him of how small and alive everything really was. He pulled out his old journal, the one he'd carried since the beginning, battered, weathered, edges soft from years of turning pages. On the first page was the line Jonathan had written years ago, "Don't build walls higher than the bridges we never finished." James smiled, then turned to a blank page and began to write, "Dear me, for years, I thought the only letters that mattered were the ones you sent to fix, to confess, to make peace. But maybe the ones you never send are just as important. They're the reminders, the echoes, the promises that turn into lives. You did a lot of things wrong. You broke trust. You ran, you fell apart. But somehow, somewhere between losing everything and finding them, you learned how to stop running. You learned that redemption isn't the end of the story. It's what you build after the story should have ended. So here's to the after. 2 mornings with burnt toast, to laughter over coffee, to the sound of a child's voice calling you Dad. For the first time, I think you made it home. J. He closed the journal and exhaled, not with sorrow this time, but with peace downstairs. Emily's laughter drifted up through the window, soft and light. The ocean breathed against the shore, and the heart pinned to his coat glinted faintly in the sunlight. For once, there were no more letters to write, just a life to live. 15 years later, the waves still sounded the same, maybe a little softer. Maybe it was Oliver who'd changed. He stood on the same porch where his parents used to drink coffee every morning. Now the house belonged to him, older, but still breathing with the same warmth. On the wall beside the doorway hung 2 framed photos, one of James and Emily at the foundation's opening ceremony, both laughing mid-sentence, the other of Oliver's Haven, the children's wing that had saved hundreds of lives, including his own. Oliver looked out toward the horizon, the sun low and gold on the water. He'd just turned 21. The world was bigger now, cities, deadlines, choices. But every road somehow led back to this place. He carried a worn leather journal, edges frayed, pages faded with salt and years. It was his father's. Inside were blueprints, sketches, notes, and letters. Most of them had never been sent. He flipped to the last page. It was blank, except for one line written in his father's familiar handwriting. "Leave space for your own letter someday." Oliver smiled, a quiet ache blooming in his chest. He'd read every word in that journal more times than he could count, but he'd never added his own. Until now, he sat down at the old porch table, pen trembling slightly in his hand, and began to write. "Dear Dad, you once said that home isn't a place. It's the people who wait when you stop running. I think I finally understand what you meant, because even though you're gone, I still feel you everywhere I go. In the sound of the ocean, in the red heart painted on every truck, in the way Mum still laughs at the smell of burnt toast. I joined the foundation last year. I work on field operations now, setting up mobile clinics across state lines. Every time I see a family step off those trucks, holding each other and crying because they're safe, I think this is what hope looks like. You didn't just build machines. You built people. You built me, and maybe one day I'll build something for someone else, something that reminds them the world still has room for good men who make mistakes, and for women strong enough to forgive them. You never sent this letter, but I think, somehow, you meant it for me all along. So here's mine, sent back, love. Oliver Rowan Carter." The ink bled slightly in the corner where a tear had fallen, but it didn't matter. He closed the journal gently, the sea breeze lifting a few stray pages in the distance. A faint rumble rolled across the coastline, a convoy of white trucks, each marked with the familiar red heart. They moved down the highway like a ribbon of light. One of them slowed as it passed his house. The driver, a woman, waved. Oliver waved back, smiling through the sunlight. He didn't know where they were headed, disaster zone, border camp, a small town in need, but he knew what they carried. The same thing his father had once carried in his hands, and his mother in her heart, hope, inside the house. Emily's old cardigan still hung by the door. The air smelled faintly of coffee and sea salt. Oliver placed the journal on the shelf, beside the framed red pin, the first one James had ever made. Then he stepped outside, letting the light hit his face. The world was still flawed, still uncertain, still worth believing in. He whispered into the wind, "Some letters don't need to be sent, Dad, they just need to be lived." And with that, he smiled, wide, free, full of everything that had begun long before him and would outlast them all.